Good day, everybody. Zack here, and welcome to another episode of Daily Rider, where we learn about motorcycles as we ride. Our guest today is the Can-Am Pulse. That is an electric motorcycle, weighs about 400 pounds, and costs around $14,000. If you know anything about motorcycles, you'll know that those numbers are not really remarkable in any way, so this thing must do something to set itself apart. Well, first of all, it's made by Can-Am, which is best known in this day and age for making three-wheelers, but used to be a household name in the world of two wheels. It also has some mechanical and electronic features that other machines, especially in this class, simply don't have. From where I'm sitting, it's a very interesting machine, and I'm excited to talk about how it works on the way to work. That discussion and more coming up. All right, everybody, off we go on another daily ride. But before we do, a quick reminder. The sponsor of this episode is, of course, RevZilla. RevZilla is not just a YouTube channel that you're watching, it's a business, an e-commerce platform where you can buy things for you and your motorcycle, or perhaps a friend who loves motorcycles. So if you're new to motorcycles, you have an electric bike, a gas bike, red bike, blue bike, large bike, small bike, it doesn't matter. If you need a helmet, tires, saddlebags, jackets, whatever, if you shop at RevZilla, a little bit of the money you spend goes into producing programming like this. That's all I really wanted to say. In the meantime, thanks for watching. All right, the Can-Am Pulse. I guess we'll start in the middle here, which is usually the engine, or on an electric bike, the motor. In this case, it's the battery. This is all a battery, which forms some of the frame, for what it's worth. The motor is back here, this little guy, ROTAX e-Power motor, and it's an interesting powertrain for a couple of reasons. The battery and motor are unremarkable in the sense of the technology they use, but it's sort of like a scooter powertrain because the swing arm is all powertrain. In other words, the motor and the drive chain assembly, which is an encapsulated, enclosed, oil-bathed chain in here, is all part of the swing arm, sort of like a scooter. So normally with an electric bike, you'll see either an electric motor that's mounted as a part of the frame, and then a belt drive or a chain drive, sort of like a conventional motorcycle. Or you'll see a hub motor, right? Something that's built in here that pushes the bike down the road. But this is a little bit of a different system and has some benefits in so much as the chain requires basically no maintenance, taking some of the snowmobile technology that BRP, the parent company of Can-Am, has learned over the years. As for the structure of the bike, of course, it is a little bit different because the battery is a sort of a stressed member, if you will, just like engines are sometimes in internal combustion engine motorcycles. And up here, you'll see a little, where's the coolant reservoir thingamajig? There it is. It's over on this side. And you'll see a radiator. And that's because the whole system is liquid cooled, which is kind of interesting. The battery, the motor, the charger, the inverter, it's all part of this liquid cooling system, which Can-Am thinks separates this bike in so much as it can be static temperature when it charges and when it runs. It's, of course, not perfect, but it is an interesting feature of this bike. Other than that, 17-inch wheels. You got KYB fork and a Sachs shock. You have a pretty big brake rotor here. I think it's a 310, 320. Maybe it's a 320 with J1 caliper and braided lines. There's only one of them, so keep that in mind when we're doing our braking evaluation. But yeah, otherwise, a seat, two wheels, a handlebar. It's a basic motorcycle. The other thing worth mentioning while we are here is that this Can-Am Pulse is the 73 iteration. It is the sort of package that commemorates 1973 when Can-Am released its first motorcycle, I believe. The 73 package has the rim stripes and some accents, and it has this doohickey, which is a doohickey, and then these LED accent lights around the headlights, which we'll see when we flick the bike on. And maybe, is there one other thing? I think that might be it. This bike costs $16,000 rather than the base price of $14,000 when you don't get that stuff. Last thing I'll mention in this context is, of course, this bike does have a sibling, the Origin, which is a taller, dirt bikey, adventure bikey looking thing. Same battery and powertrain, but different wheels, 10 inches of suspension travel instead of 5.5, that kind of thing, and costs a bit more than the base bike, not the special edition one. I think that might be just about all I want to talk about right now. Of course, you could take one last look at the passenger seat, which isn't, so we won't be talking about passenger accommodations. It is an option, I believe, which we'll cover later. But for now, let's click on this 10 1/4 inch tablet that Can-Am has fixed to this bike. And I'll say that I understand that riding a motorcycle is risky, which I have to do every time I turn the bike on for some reason. Yeah, we're just about ready to go here. Roll the throttle forward and then hold this starter button and you get a little doot, and we are ready to go. Oh, my phone's connected. All right, right. I thought I was going to do something about that anyway. Let's see here. Plug in my phone so we can fiddle with the whole Apple CarPlay thing, which is kind of fun. All right, so we got Apple CarPlay going on here. We got to turn the bike back on, and then we'll be ready to go. You can see on my calendar, daily rider recording from 9 to 11 a.m. We're right on time. All right, enough of this mumbo jumbo. Let's go. Okie we're rolling along here, so we can start talking about some specs. Actually, let's just go back. Go back to the home screen, look at the gauges. We'll come back to the whole CarPlay thing. But yes, specifications. I talked about the price, so we don't need to cover that. And the seat height is just under 31 inches, I believe 30.9. And of course, it's pretty narrow in the waist here, being electric bikes often are. And so it feels pretty unintimidating to sit on. Claimed horsepower is 47 maximum, I believe, with a continuous rating of 27, which are pretty low numbers. Though typical e-bike, it has a torque rating of 53 foot-pounds, which is higher than a 47 or 27 horsepower gas-powered bike would have. And what that means is acceleration is pretty good, which we'll experiment with in a minute here. Last specification that comes to mind is the 8.9 kilowatt hour battery, which, if you'll remember, I believe the Zero S we just did had a 15.6 kilowatt hour. The Zero FXE that we covered on this program before, I believe, has a 7.4, 7.3, and that's another small 300 and something pound bike. So this is definitely a smallish battery, about half or less than half the size of some of the larger electric offerings on the market, like Livewire 1 or large capacity offerings from Zero. As for what it's like to sit on, I mentioned it's pretty narrow, and that is true. The foot pegs feel a little farther forward than I was expecting when I first climbed aboard. But otherwise, it's a pretty neutral, regular old riding position. There's like a little bit of a sporty lean forward to this low-rise handlebar, and I find it quite a reasonable place to sit. The seat is a little bit narrow, and I don't think that padding was a huge priority as far as I can tell, but that might snap into focus when we talk about range a little bit later on. Right, this is where an electric bike is particularly good. Actually, any electric vehicle in traffic, we're sort of like stop go and not moving very fast. Efficiency is high. Of course, they're quiet, smooth, and I don't really care about any of that. I just want to go faster, obviously. But if nothing else, that's not a bad segue into what the bike feels like on the highway, because this is not, of course, the Can-Am Pulse's natural habitat, if you will. This kind of riding is very inefficient for electric motorcycles, and it does not have a very big battery. So if you do want to ride like this, you're not going to be able to do it for very long. Perhaps for that reason, it's not especially comfortable doing this kind of thing. You sit pretty upright and you're out in the wind because there's no wind protection, obviously, aside from the half an iPad in front of you. And of course, it's limited to, I think it's limited to 80 miles an hour. You're not gonna set any speed records with this bike. The ergonomics and basic infrastructure of the powertrain show that. One thing I appreciate about the speed limit on this bike ultimately is that it doesn't do the thing, like if you're on a motorcycle that only goes 80 miles an hour, really it only goes 65 or 70 before it just is like almost out of gas. Like you might be able to get to 80, but you can just barely get there. But because this bike is, you know, governed, limited for that, for the sake of the battery and the motor perhaps, it gets there pretty quickly. So if you do want to go 75 or 80, it's no problem. It'll sprint up to those speeds. But just as I said, don't expect to do that for very long. I will say, for my complaints about wind protection and the seat not being especially comfortable, I never really found any problem practically with riding the bike like this. Do you always wish a bike goes more than 80 miles an hour if you're going to ride it on Southern California freeways in particular? Yeah, you do. But I used it day to day for many weeks and it was totally fine. On the topic of range, you might have noticed that we had about 60 miles of predicted range with the battery at 100% when we left, and we have gone 6 or 7 miles now, and we've lost 10 miles of predicted range, which is the computer's way of telling us that it hates this style of travel. As for actual range and usable statistics, I was seeing about 50 or 60 miles of total range in city driving, like surface street, that kind of thing. If you go on the highway, like I said, it's going to take a lot out of that, and you know, not totally what the bike is designed for. The good news with a small battery, of course, is it fills up pretty fast. You can do level 1 or level 2 charging. As for charging times, I can tell you anecdotally, the last time I charged up this bike, which was last night, it was down at 30%, and I plugged it in 2 hours and 45 minutes later it was full. That was just an outlet at my house, so you can do, you know, level 2 charging if you have that capability at your house or at a public charger, and it'll be a lot faster than that. I think Can-Am claims 45 or 50 minutes to go from 20% to 90% or 10 to 90 or something like that. So yeah, like I said, good news about a small battery is that it charges quickly, but you don't have a lot of legs realistically to go places because your range is limited. Feels a little silly to talk about mirrors on the highway on this bike because it's not a highway bike, but this is what we always do at this part of the ride, and I'll say that they're placed pretty well, but kind of small. They're more like city mirrors, not touring mirrors, which I guess we can't be surprised about. Right, as we come down from highway speeds into the neighborhood, not a bad time to talk about regenerative braking, which when you let go of the throttle, you get a little bit of regenerative braking, which you can see on this little blue chart here. If you approach a stoplight and roll forward on the throttle, you get even more. So, neighborhood challenge, where we try to do 0 mile an hour stops without putting our feet down, and by gosh, the Can-Am Pulse is pretty good at that kind of thing. As quickly as we transitioned from the freeway to riding around a neighborhood suburbia like this, that's how fast the Pulse kind of comes into its own. This is like what an electric bike is good at. The throttle response is practically perfect because there's no clutch engagement, it's just a single speed, twist and go. It's very intuitive and easy to use, and of course it's a fairly low, fairly small, sub 400 pound motorcycle, which is kind of unintimidating to sit on and control anyway. And yeah, that really means that this type of riding is easy, as it should be. So I mentioned this little power meter here, and of course it's not the same as an internal combustion bike, but if you think of it like kind of like a tachometer, this little orange bar is how hard the motor is working to push the bike forward, and then the little inverse blue bar is how much energy theoretically the battery is gaining back under deceleration. So if you really open the throttle a lot, you'll see that orange bar go way up, and if you just cruise along like this, you'll see it's not using very much power at all. I think it's it's kind of a cartoony thing. A lot of electric vehicles do this, but I think it helps the rider keep in mind the energy that's being used. Not to mention for a new rider or something like that, you get to sort of understand what's available to you. While we're on the topic, you can see that this orange bar goes all the way up to around here. If I were to change the ride mode to normal, you would see that it trims the top of that orange bar. And if I change the ride mode to rain, it keeps it in the same place. I guess I meant to put it in eco. Let's see here. Since we're on the topic, let's just put it down into eco mode, and that trims maximum output to right here. So now we are wide open, and you can see that we don't get to use the top probably 2/3 of the power source, I guess. So you can see it'll still go 40-50 miles an hour with relatively little effort, but I will say I dislike eco mode because the bike is just really, really feeble. Like, wide open. I'm sure it's economical, and I can appreciate that. I just could not bring myself to ride around in that mode. It just is not fun. Sorry. A good way to polish off this section of the ride, where the Can-Am Pulse is certainly an imperfect machine, but this is really what it does best. This is where the engine, powertrain, battery are most efficient and work the best, and it's just quiet and small and easy and very good at this type of riding. got a long enough footless stop that we could yield to the other car. Okay, doke, onto Lover's Lane, and you remember the passenger accommodations, which are zilch. Of course, there's an option, and I reckon if you want to bop around town with someone on the back, it doesn't really matter how uncomfortable they are because they're not going to be there for very long. Quick sidebar, subjectively, op-ed rant here. What the heck, man? Why not just give me a passenger seat? You kidding me? No passenger foot pegs, no passenger seat on a bike that's supposed to be a city commuter thing? What? Why not? Passenger pegs as an option on a bike like this is ridiculous in my opinion. Okie doke, Twisty Road section. You know, this bike's not super inspiring in roads like this, frankly, and if you happen to live right next to twisty roads, then maybe you'd get a kick out of doing this type of riding on a Can-Am Pulse, but you probably don't. You probably get a couple little suburban twists and turns like this. Otherwise, if you have to ride any more than 5 or 10 miles to get to the twisty roads, then you're probably just not going to enjoy them on this bike anyway. And that's just as well, because it doesn't provide, I don't think, a lot of joy riding in roads like this. It's perfectly amenable. It is not difficult to steer. It has plenty of ground clearance. You can lean it over. It's got decent tires. It works fine. But nothing about the bike in this environment tells me that this was something that it should do well, and I don't really blame Can-Am for that. Just kind of calling a spade, I guess. Right, down to the bottom of the hill and turning back onto surface streets. You can twist the stick for just a second, get a little acceleration in. It's not hugely fast, but it's enough to be entertaining. I appreciate that. Some people have equated this bike to any other 47 horsepower motorcycle. Like, you're never going to get excited about a 45, 50 horsepower motorcycle. This motorcycle is faster than a gas-powered 50 horsepower motorcycle that you have ridden, chances are. It just hits different. It's not outright fast. It doesn't have a fast top speed. It's not going to do a quarter mile especially quickly, but that little punch from 10 miles an hour to 40 or 50 miles an hour, I think, is entertaining and speaks to what the bike's good at. Right, down to the bottom of the hill. I'm going to use my regen, and we're also going to jump on that front brake, which works pretty well. It's not super bike strong. I think that's just because there's one rotor and it's a 400-pound bike, so kind of is what it is. It feels to me like a brake that was designed to do the job, not intimidate people that might be new to motorcycling, and satisfy those who have ridden motorcycles before. And I guess it does that. I'm going to check trip statistics here. Go to stats and we'll look at, oh hey, there's a trip here. Current ride has been about 30 minutes and about 19 miles and 8 miles per kilowatt hour. So that's a little less than I was getting when I was riding the bike just in the city. I was getting around 9. So we can go back to gauges. That's where we can talk about the dash anyway, I suppose. So this is the main sort of home screen here. We got this thingy we've talked about in the Speedo. We've talked about odometer, battery life, which is generic like a fuel gauge. And if you tap this sucker here, you can see media, you can see, oops, tip, 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 tip. You can see statistics, which we were just looking at. You can also connect to your phone or navigation, which in this case is happening via my phone. So you can see where we are, and you can use Apple CarPlay as you would, which is pretty slick, I guess. It's not hugely convenient to use because in order for Apple CarPlay to work, you have to connect the headset on your helmet via Bluetooth, which is kind of annoying if your phone and your headset are already connected, because then the Bluetooth connection is fighting itself and you have to plug the phone in, and it's just like a little bit clunky. And I bring this up because the Goldwing, Honda Goldwing that we have in our shop right now has wireless CarPlay. I just leave my phone in my pocket, I get on, I turn on my headset, everything's connected, it's fine. And that is much, much easier. And knowing the technology exists, whether it's in a car or on another motorcycle, and doesn't on a premium offering like this, has me scratching my head just a little bit. And while I'm complaining about things, I don't understand why we need to connect our headset in order for me to look at a map. Who flippin' cares? Just let me plug my phone in and use a helmet without a headset and navigate with the visuals. Maybe they get busted if you can't hear it because you're not supposed to be taking your eyes off the road. I don't know what the deal is, but a little bit of a flawed system, which is too bad because CarPlay is something that a lot of people understand and know how to use. And I think that makes it a great addition to the world of motorcycling, especially a sort of tech-heavy bike like this. When I posted pictures of this bike on Instagram, I got a lot of people laughing at how big the dash was. I thought that was interesting. There were a lot of people that were like, God, the dash is so big, it's so dumb. Which is funny because, you know, companies are always sort of striving to provide the most interesting and colorful and big dash they can. And perhaps Can-Am went too far. People seemed almost annoyed at how big the dash is on this bike. But I think considering the machine's offering what it does best and what it's aimed at doing, I don't hate it. It's so much more sophisticated, really, than lots of other machines, which is, you know, this bike needs all it can get when it comes to differentiating itself. All right, coming into the ride here, talking about this Can-Am Pulse. And there's a couple things I want to mention. Perhaps you're one of the people that either knows or believes that the Origin, the sort of off-roady sibling to the Pulse, is the better bike. That is an opinion that is shared among many of my colleagues, not least of which our buddy Ryan Fortnine, who did a great video on these bikes, talking about the technology, the build, and the history of the company. But, as he pointed out in his video, whether that bike is good is irrelevant, because an adventure bike that only goes less than 100 miles is kind of useless. So really, this is the bike that needs to be good, and it's not as good, or I don't think it's good enough to set itself apart in a world of other small machines that weigh less than 400 pounds and sort of do what we just did on this ride, albeit with less technology and perhaps less acceleration, but with a little bit more spunk and joy. And I think that's kind of what we are all here to do. And that is ultimately what I've come to realize in riding this bike, is that the thing that electric motorcycles are good at is unfortunately not what we seem to like to do with them in this country, in the United States. The companies are under some amount of pressure from governments or their board of directors or whatever it is to produce electric options, and lots of companies are producing electric options, but the technology just kind of isn't there for an electric motorcycle to stand toe-to-toe with a gas bike, especially when it comes to just being a general joyful part of your day. Like, this bike is fun. It accelerates quickly. It looks pretty sleek. The performance and usability metrics of the bike don't, in my opinion, stack up the way they need to. And I'm starting to get kind of frustrated that every time an electric motorcycle company comes out with a product, it aims at the same space to do something performance oriented or be light or try to set itself apart in those silos, and it just doesn't work. And I don't know exactly what the answer is, but maybe try something different, because this whole target of inner city transportation and that kind of thing is like, it's cute, but I don't think it's getting electric motorcycles on the map. Speaking of getting where we need to go, let's head down this dirt road. Now, this would be, of course, the Can-Am Origins home turf, but we're going to ride it on the Pulse and see how this traction control works. We're going to leave traction control on in Sport Plus and see what we get here. Let's see what we get. It's very, very, very timid. ABS surprisingly lenient. Okay, so that's traction control on, and that's Sport Plus mode, so I can't imagine that like we could try rain. Let's try rain mode. Still quite a bit of acceleration. I don't hate it, but I'm going to go back to Sport Plus, and then I'm going to go over to the settings. Oh, you're not going to let me do it with the... Come on. TC off. Let's try that one for size. No. Interesting. Okay. But it didn't just spin all the way up. So we get... So it's doing the same thing that the ZRS did, which it releases traction control, but it doesn't leave the motor and the rear wheel completely uninhibited. It lets you spin up to a much higher degree. It's sort of a dangerous degree. But it still catches itself, which must be to do with front rear wheel speed. And that's kind of fair, to be honest, because an electric motorcycle can absolutely put you on your head if you don't have that kind of backstop. Okay, so you may have noticed up to this point we've done a couple wheelies, but we'll do another one here. And, oh, no, we're going too fast. We gotta slow down more. We gotta go more like 10, 15 miles an hour to get the front wheel to come up. Hell yep. Yeah. Pretty good wheelie, I gotta say. It gets a little weird because the traction control starts to realize what's going on and kind of like dumb the throttle down. But the fact that you can do that is a positive thing. Is it enough to save the pulse in my own mind's eye? Well, I guess we'll have to get to the leaderboard to talk about that. One more sprint. Here we go. Yes, sir. All right, last test, of course, is can you back it in, and we'll give it a try, but I don't think so. Yeah, no, the ABS is not particularly adjustable. And, you know, honestly, if you could shut off rear ABS easily, then I wouldn't back it in really at all because it's scary. So instead of backing it in, let's take a quick spin over to the statistics for this ride. Where's current ride? What do we got here? We got 24.4 miles, average speed of 29 miles an hour, 8 miles per kilowatt hour, which is a little less than I was getting riding just in the city. 33 miles of range left. So you're talking, it's still saying we're going to get 60 miles, but I don't think that that's true if we kept on doing that ride. The point is, if you got a 25-mile commute, you can go to work and go back, and you should be okay. But, you know, just like any electric bike, it'll be a little bit nerve-wracking. All right, U-turn challenge. We're going to get as close to this Ford Transit as we can, and then we're going to go up, full lock left. Yeah, oh yeah, less than 2 parking spaces. That's good stuff. That's good stuff. It doesn't have a lot of personality, but ultimately the, you know, performance of an electric bike in situations like this is playful if you kind of like poke and prod at it. Anyway, there we have it, everybody. The Can-Am Pulse got us to work with some range to spare, though it is flawed in some ways, as we talked about. Okie doke, let's hear what you all want to know. First question here is from Perry Drives, who says, at $14,000 for 60 miles of range, would you rather have this or the BMW CEO4 scooter? Good question. Can-Am and BMW both hold good standing in my mind. They're real power sports companies. I have a lot of trouble comparing this bike or any other electric bike to the myriad companies that pop up that are sometimes around for 6 months or 2 years or 3 years that promise a new wave of electric blah blah blah, and they all use the same technology, which is a battery and electric motor, and if you have lots of Series A funding, you can make them cheap for a little while, and then it just doesn't work. BMW and Can-Am are two companies that have the ability to actually put these bikes forward into the market. I'd have a BMW CEO4 because you'll notice that this is the onboard storage on the Can-Am, and the BMW CEO4 has a 30-liter storage pouch that holds a helmet. And I don't really know what this bike does that the CEO4 doesn't. I mean, it looks like a motorcycle, not a scooter, and it handles like a motorcycle, not like a scooter, but like, I don't care. I don't know, like, I would just want the storage and the practicality, and I think the CEO4 looks goofy and funny and cool and all that all at the same time, and that would be the bike that I pick. Next question is from Neon Hoshi, who says, being a couple years newer than the Livewire S2 platform and many years newer than Zero's older platform, does this show progression in the electric motorcycle realm, or is it more stagnant? Good question. And I'm sure that an electric motorcycle engineer or someone intimately familiar with the industry might say, there's progress being made. That would be the optimistic point of view, I assume, but no, is my take. There isn't a lot of progress. This is the same technology that everyone kind of uses, and it's the same ceiling that everybody bumps up against virtually, which is that it's hard to make a bike stand toe-to-toe with a gasoline alternative. You have to have it deliver some other thing, whether it's a feature or a gimmick or whatever. Like, they're always reaching for some other thing because the energy density in the battery just, it's not there yet. It doesn't keep up with gasoline. I'm curious to see. I hope that obviously there are strides that are made, but for now, it largely seems the same to me, broadly. Next question is from KSO17, who says, seems like the range figure is the biggest Achilles heel here. Right, we talked about that a little bit already. Let's pretend this bike had 200 miles of range. How does your opinion of its bike and its value stand? Interesting question. Obviously, that changes a lot of things, right? If it had 200 miles of range, in this case, it would mean it had a battery that made it weigh, 600 or 800 pounds. I think what you're asking, though, is pretend that's not the case. You could just have a 400-pound bike that would go 200 miles. And I do think that would change the calculus. That would mean that the whole energy density thing we just talked about would be different, and people would be much more willing to accept this, even if it took overnight to charge or whatever, that they would have more freedom and more range, because you don't need to take a road trip on an electric bike. You just need to not feel like your neck is close to the noose when it comes to the battery running out of juice. So to answer your question, if it's this bike, 400 pounds, $14,000, you can go 200 miles, totally changes my view of the value of the bike. I think all of a sudden it's a steal. And I think a lot of people would maybe feel the same way. Next question is from Fly Dougie, who says, does the electric motorcycle market seem like a successful business model for manufacturers in 2025? Whew. Good question. Very good question. I think, like I said, there is a lot of pressure to move forward because there are lots of mandates coming about all electric vehicles needing to be produced from governments around the world, and inner city congestion. Like if you're going to ride into a dense urban area, whether it's London or New York or wherever else, you're going to need to have a high efficiency vehicle or an electric vehicle, so there's not so much pollution, stuff like that. I think that companies are moving in that direction for those reasons, but I don't see a lot of heart in it. I don't see there being a really valid reason to build this bike if you're a big company like Can-Am and you're selling oodles of three-wheelers and side-by-sides, or if you're Harley-Davidson making live wires when you're selling lots of other motorcycles, or if you're BMW or Honda and you're selling lots of cars and motorcycles that run on gasoline, or they're hybrids, or they make more sense for other reasons. All of this just feels like it doesn't make sense unless you're going to be a small company like Zero or something like that makes a few motorcycles for a few people. That is a business model, but there's not a lot of room in the market for that. And when a big company like Can-Am comes out with a bike like this, as much nostalgia is involved and the 1973 badging, and we can all say, remember, that's such a fun idea. I'm not sensing that it matters in a way beyond the stockholders and the government mandates, even though it does power wheelies and it got me to work. And you can do worse than that. All right. Thanks for sticking with me. Thanks for asking good questions as usual. Stick around a little bit longer. We're going to go put this sucker on the Daily Rider leaderboard. Okie dokie, everybody. Here we go on another leaderboard run. We got the Can-Am Pulse ready to go. As a reminder of what's on the leaderboard or what's at the top of the leaderboard, you got your CF Moto Ibex 450, Husqvarna Svartpilen 801, and Yamaha MT09, as well as these other machines that have also been daily ridden in 2025. The Can-Am Pulse, as we always say with electric bikes, is a little bit of a knife to a gunfight. The good news is that it has a direct competitor, the Zero S, which is a $15,000 base price, I think, and has a larger battery, is much heavier, but both electric bikes, both naked, upright, sporty-ish machines. Pretty direct competition there. So the Can-Am Pulse is probably going to fall in this area somewhere, bottom half of the board, because it is ultimately expensive for the capability that you get. It would be awesome if it was, half the price that it is. So all that being said, I think we can make it a pretty fast sort of placement here on the board. What do you think? Can-Am Pulse, Apple CarPlay, 390 pounds, power wheelies, good stuff. Zero S, much more distance, much more weight, much less sophistication in the dash and connectivity, that kind of thing. Drum roll, thoughts? What do you think? Come on, there we go. I'm gonna put the Can-Am Pulse just below the Zero S. I think the Zero ultimately is kind of a better purchase because you do get a lot more range capability. You get a lot more from the bike. And I don't think it handles as well as the Can-Am Pulse because it's heavier. It does have a little more power ultimately. It can go faster, which is nice. But really it's that big battery that I think is a good balance between capability and usability.
As we talked about on the ride, you know, you can go the better part of 100 miles on a sort of normal daily ride around, do errands, get to work, whatever you need to do. And it's small enough that it's the size of a regular motorcycle. It's heavy, undeniably, but it's a regular size motorcycle. So, I mean, for my commute, when I'm not on the daily rider route, my commute is only a handful of miles, and the Can-Am Pulse honestly would be perfect for that. I can take city streets, I can take the highway if I want to. It's short. One charge will last the whole week. It's easy. If you're in a dense urban area, I think that bike makes a lot of sense. If you do want a little bit more range, a little bit more capability, the Zero is gonna make more sense. And if you wanna burn gasoline like your granddaddy done did, then you got all these other bikes that can do that. So I hope this made sense. I hope you'll check out the article, which is linked in the description of this video. It has more information, photos, and details on the Can-Am Pulse, as well as its sibling, the Origin. Other than that, stay tuned for the next Daily Rider, I guess. As usual, I hope you learned a thing or two, and I hope you had fun. I'll see you next time.
Maybe that's kind of an inappropriate song to have up. I didn't even really think about that. Oh my god, you kidding me? Then just skip the song. Stupid. No. God damn it. Stop doing that.